You can stop buying coffee, you can cancel subscriptions, you can delete every shopping app on your phone. You can say no to dinners, weekends away, new clothes, upgrades, and impulse purchases. You can do everything people online tell you to do in order to be good with money and still feel like you're standing still. Month after month, year after year, you look at your bank account and wonder why all that effort isn't translating into real progress. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to hear. In 2026, saving more money is not what's holding most people back. In many cases, it's the very thing keeping them stuck, not because saving is wrong, not because discipline doesn't matter, but because saving is being used as a substitute for something far more important, making better structural decisions. For decades, we've been taught a very simple story about money. Spend less than you earn. Save the difference. Repeat this long enough and everything will work out. And when it doesn't, the conclusion is always the same. You must not be trying hard enough. You need more discipline, more control, more restriction. So you cut again, you say no again. You remove another small pleasure from your life and tell yourself it will all be worth it later. But what if the problem isn't effort at all? What if the people struggling the most aren't careless spenders or impulsive shoppers, but the most responsible ones? The people who plan ahead, track every dollar, and feel guilty for even small, harmless purchases. The people who don't feel out of control with money, but feel constantly constrained by it. That feeling matters because it points to a very different problem. People who are out of control need discipline. People who feel constrained usually have a system that's working against them. And most financial advice completely ignores this distinction. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you already do many things right. You budget. You think before you spend. You delay gratification. You're not reckless. Yet despite all that, money still feels tight. Not chaotic, tight. Like no matter how carefully you manage things, there's never enough room to breathe. That's not a motivation issue. That's a structural issue. Here's the idea most people miss, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. There is a hard limit to how much you can cut from your spending. You can only cancel so many subscriptions. You can only skip so many outings. You can only downgrade your lifestyle so far before it starts affecting your quality of life and your mental health. But there is no limit to how much the wrong big decisions can quietly drain you, month after month, without you even noticing. This is what I call the fixed cost trap. It happens when the biggest expenses in your life were locked in years ago, often during moments of optimism or social pressure, and then never questioned again. Housing choices, transportation choices, insurance decisions, commitments that feel normal because everyone around you has them, but quietly consume such a large share of your income that no amount of frugality can compensate. And this problem has become much worse in 2026. The financial environment has changed in ways many people haven't fully adjusted to. Housing takes up a larger percentage of income than it used to. Transportation costs have increased. Healthcare expenses are higher and less predictable. At the same time, wages haven't kept pace in the same way. So, when people respond to these pressures by cutting small expenses, they're fighting a structural shift with micro solutions. And that creates frustration, fatigue, and eventually burnout. This is why so many disciplined people feel like they're doing everything right and getting nowhere. They're applying effort where leverage is required. Saving more money is effort. Fixing big decisions is leverage. Effort exhausts you over time. Leverage quietly changes your trajectory. Yet most people spend 90% of their financial energy optimizing the smallest parts of their budget while ignoring the few decisions that shape everything else. They obsess over daily spending while the real money flows out through commitments they made once and never revisited. So if the issue isn't laziness, if it isn't lack of discipline, and it isn't impulse spending, then what is actually keeping disciplined people stuck financially? In the next section, we're going to break down why good savers still feel broke, how the illusion of progress is created, and why focusing on the wrong metrics can make you feel responsible while quietly delaying real financial freedom. Most people think they're measuring financial progress correctly, but in reality, they're tracking the wrong signals. They look at how little they spend in a week, how much they saved this month, or how disciplined they felt saying no. These things feel productive because they are visible and immediate. You can feel virtuous the same day you skip a purchase. But financial freedom doesn't respond to short-term effort. It responds to long-term structure. This is why so many good savers feel broke even while doing everything they were told would work. They are winning small battles while losing the war quietly in the background. The metrics they focus on reward restraint, not momentum. And restraint on its own does not build wealth. When someone says, "I'm saving more than ever, but I still feel behind," that's not a contradiction. It's a warning sign. It usually means their income is being absorbed by commitments they can't easily change. Fixed payments that arrive every month regardless of how disciplined they are, rent or mortgage. Car payments, insurance premiums, healthcare costs. Obligations that don't care how many coffees you skipped. Here's where the illusion of progress becomes dangerous. Saving money creates a sense of control. It feels like movement. But if your net worth isn't growing at a meaningful rate, if your flexibility isn't increasing, and if your stress levels remain high, then saving is acting more like a coping mechanism than a solution. It helps you survive the system you're in, but it doesn't help you escape it. Good savers often confuse being responsible with being strategic. Responsibility is about not making mistakes. Strategy is about positioning yourself so fewer mistakes can hurt you. You can be extremely responsible inside a bad structure and still struggle indefinitely. That's why discipline alone is not enough. Discipline keeps you afloat. Structure determines whether you move forward. Another reason disciplined people feel stuck is because they underestimate how slowly progress happens when most of their income is already spoken for. If 80% of what you earn is committed before the month even starts, the remaining 20% has to do all the work. It has to cover savings, emergencies, joy, rest, and progress. That's an impossible job. And when it fails, people blame themselves instead of the math. This leads to a dangerous cycle. You feel like you're not doing enough, so you restrict more. You cut deeper, you remove more comfort. Over time, money stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like a source of constant pressure. Not because you're bad with it, but because you're asking it to perform miracles within a system that doesn't allow room for growth. There's also a psychological cost to this approach that rarely gets talked about. When all your financial wins come from saying no, your relationship with money becomes negative by default. Progress feels like deprivation. Stability feels fragile. And any unexpected expense feels like failure, even when it's completely normal and predictable. This mindset doesn't lead to long-term success. It leads to fatigue. What actually moves the needle financially is not how well you manage what's left over, but how much you keep available in the first place. Flexibility is the real signal of financial health, the ability to absorb shocks, the ability to redirect money when priorities change, the ability to invest without fear that one mistake will unravel everything. This is why two people with the same income and the same savings rate can have completely different financial outcomes. One has designed their commitments intentionally. The other accepted defaults. One has room to adjust, the other is locked in. On paper, they look similar. In reality, they live in different financial worlds. So when people ask why they still feel broke despite being disciplined, the answer is rarely found in their spending habits. It's found in the decisions they made once, assumed were normal, and never revisited. Decisions that shape cash flow, stress levels, and future options far more than any daily expense ever could. In the next section, we're going to start identifying those decisions clearly, beginning with the biggest and most influential one for almost everyone, the roof over your head. Because if housing is misaligned, nothing else in your financial life can fully work the way it should. For most people, the single biggest financial decision they will ever make is not an investment portfolio or a career move. It's housing, where you live, how much space you choose, how long you lock yourself into payments, and how much of your income disappears before the month even begins. Housing doesn't just affect your budget, it sets the ceiling on your freedom. The mistake most people make is thinking of housing as neutral. as something you simply need, so the only question becomes how nice it can be, how convenient the location is, or how quickly they can upgrade once their income increases. But housing is not neutral. It is the largest fixed cost in most households, and fixed costs behave very differently from everything else in your finances. A fixed cost doesn't respond to discipline. It doesn't care how careful you are this month. It arrives on time, every month, and takes its share first. That means the larger your housing commitment, the smaller the margin you have everywhere else. And margin is what creates options. Without margin, every other decision becomes harder. In recent years, housing has quietly shifted from being a foundation to being a constraint. A growing share of income now goes toward rent or mortgage payments before utilities, groceries, transportation, or healthcare are even considered. That means many people are effectively starting each month already behind, trying to make the remaining portion of their income do an impossible amount of work. What makes this especially dangerous is that housing decisions are usually made during optimistic moments. You're earning more, you expect raises, you assume stability. You stretch slightly because it feels manageable, but a small stretch at the housing level doesn't stay small. It compounds over decades. A decision that costs a few hundred more each month doesn't just affect today. It reduces your flexibility for years, sometimes for an entire phase of life. Another common trap is treating housing primarily as an investment rather than a cost structure. People justify higher payments by telling themselves that at least the money is going somewhere, but cash flow matters more than narratives. A home may appreciate over time, but if the payment consumes so much of your income that you can't invest, take risks, or absorb shocks, the opportunity cost can quietly outweigh the benefits. There's also the hidden cost of scale. Larger or more expensive homes rarely cost just more in rent or mortgage payments. They usually increase property taxes, maintenance, insurance, utilities, and furnishing expenses. Each layer adds friction. What looks like a single decision often turns into a cluster of ongoing financial obligations that are hard to reverse. The most overlooked aspect of housing, though, is psychological. When a large portion of your income is locked into one payment, it changes how you experience money. You become more risk-averse, more anxious about income changes, less willing to invest in yourself, relocate, or take opportunities that don't offer immediate stability. Your life starts optimizing around protecting the payment rather than expanding possibilities. None of this means you should aim for the smallest or cheapest place possible. The goal isn't deprivation, it's alignment. The question is not, how much house can I afford? But how much house allows my life to stay flexible? That shift alone changes everything. It reframes housing as a support system rather than a status symbol or a milestone to rush toward. This is especially important early in your financial journey. Overcommitting to housing too soon often delays progress more than almost any other decision. It locks you into a lifestyle before your income, priorities, and identity have fully stabilized. And once locked in, your only lever becomes cutting everywhere else. People rarely connect their feeling of being stuck to their housing choice because it feels permanent and non-negotiable. But that's exactly why it deserves the most scrutiny. You don't need perfection, you need room to adapt, room to invest, room to recover from mistakes and take advantage of opportunities when they appear. If housing takes too much, it doesn't matter how disciplined you are with the rest. You can optimize groceries, cancel subscriptions, and skip small luxuries indefinitely and still feel like progress is painfully slow. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the foundation itself is misaligned. Once housing is understood correctly, something important happens. You stop obsessing over small expenses and start respecting the power of big decisions. And that mindset shift is what allows everything else in your financial life to finally start working together instead of against you. In the next section, we're going to look at another category that behaves very similarly to housing, but is often underestimated because it's broken into smaller monthly payments: transportation. And why the way most people think about cars quietly undermines their long-term financial momentum. Transportation is one of the most misunderstood financial decisions people make, not because it's small, but because it's disguised as normal. Cars are treated as a fact of life, a necessity you don't question. Something everyone has and therefore something that must be reasonable. But transportation is often the second largest fixed cost in a household, and like housing, it quietly shapes how much freedom you actually have. The danger with cars is not the purchase itself. It's the structure wrapped around it. Monthly payments, insurance, fuel, maintenance, registration, repairs, and depreciation all working together to drain cash flow in ways that are easy to underestimate. Because these costs are spread out, they feel manageable. But when combined, they can rival housing in how much pressure they put on your finances. One of the biggest traps is focusing only on whether you can afford the monthly payment. Dealerships are exceptionally good at making expensive vehicles feel accessible by stretching terms, lowering upfront costs, and framing the decision around comfort or safety rather than long-term impact. But a lower monthly payment doesn't mean a lower cost. It often means a longer commitment and more money lost over time. Cars are also one of the few assets people buy knowing with certainty that it will lose value, yet they still treat the purchase as a milestone or a reward. This creates a strange contradiction where people celebrate acquiring something that immediately starts working against their net worth. And because depreciation is invisible, it's rarely felt day to day. You don't feel poorer when your car loses value overnight, but the loss is real. What makes transportation especially damaging to financial progress is how it interacts with income. Car costs scale upward as income increases even when needs don't. As people earn more, they upgrade vehicles, add features, and increase payments, locking in higher expenses without increasing flexibility. The result is lifestyle inflation that feels justified but quietly consumes future opportunities. There's also a compounding effect most people ignore. A high car payment reduces how much you can save or invest each month. That means fewer assets working for you, slower net worth growth, and less buffer for emergencies. Over years, this gap becomes massive. Two people earning the same income can end up in radically different positions simply based on how aggressively they committed to transportation costs. Beyond the numbers, transportation decisions shape behavior. When a large portion of your income is tied to a vehicle, you become more cautious. You may avoid career risks, hesitate to relocate, or feel trapped in a job you don't like because you need the payment to keep making sense. The car becomes a silent boss in your life, demanding consistency even when your goals change. Another overlooked factor is optionality. Cheaper, simpler transportation increases your ability to pivot. It allows you to save faster, invest earlier, and take advantage of opportunities that don't offer immediate stability. Expensive transportation does the opposite. It narrows your options and raises the cost of change. And in a fast-moving world, the cost of not being able to change can be enormous. None of this means you should drive the cheapest possible car at all times. The point isn't sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice, it's awareness. Understanding that every dollar committed to a depreciating asset is a dollar that can't compound elsewhere. It's recognizing that comfort today often comes at the expense of flexibility tomorrow. When people feel like they're doing everything right but still can't get ahead, transportation is often the hidden leak. Not because they made a reckless choice, but because they accepted a default. They followed what felt normal, what everyone else was doing, without questioning whether it matched the life they actually wanted. Once you start viewing transportation as a structural decision rather than a lifestyle accessory, something shifts. You stop asking, "What car fits my income?" and start asking, "What transportation choice protects my freedom?" That question alone can change the trajectory of your finances more than any budgeting trick ever will. In the next section, we're going to move beyond big-ticket items and talk about a different kind of financial drain that doesn't show up as one large payment, but can be just as destructive over time. Lifestyle subscriptions, recurring obligations, and the illusion of small expenses that add up to permanent pressure. Most people think subscriptions are harmless because they're small, $10 here, $15 there, something you barely notice leaving your account. And that's exactly why they're so dangerous. Subscriptions don't hurt you all at once. They hurt you by permanence. They turn temporary decisions into permanent obligations, and over time they quietly harden your financial life. What makes subscriptions uniquely powerful is that they normalize recurring spending without forcing you to redecide. Once something is set on autopilot, it no longer competes for attention. It no longer feels like a choice, and anything that no longer feels like a choice slowly becomes invisible. That's how people wake up one day wondering why their income disappeared without anything to show for it. But the real issue with subscriptions isn't the dollar amount. It's the psychological shift they create. When a growing portion of your income is already spoken for before the month even begins, your money stops feeling flexible. You don't feel like you're choosing how to spend it. You feel like you're managing obligations. And that feeling changes behavior. When your baseline expenses rise, your tolerance for risk drops. You're less willing to experiment, invest, or try something uncertain. You become protective of what's left, even if what's left is small. This is how people end up playing defense financially for years, not because they're afraid of growth, but because they've unknowingly built a life that punishes volatility. There's also a subtle identity trap here. Many subscriptions are sold not as tools but as versions of who you want to be. Fitness apps sell discipline. Learning platforms sell intelligence. Financial tools sell control. Entertainment sells escape. Each one feels reasonable in isolation, but together they create a lifestyle that costs more to maintain than it returns in value. Over time, subscriptions create a false sense of progress. You feel productive because you're enrolled in things. You feel responsible because you're using tools. You feel modern because everything is automated. But enrollment is not execution. Paying for access is not the same as using it. And most people dramatically overestimate how much value they extract from what they're subscribed to. Another overlooked consequence is how subscriptions raise your minimum viable income. The more recurring costs you lock in, the more money you need just to stay afloat. That means raises feel smaller, windfalls disappear faster, and side income feels less impactful. You don't feel richer when you earn more because the floor keeps rising with you. This is why saving more often feels pointless. People cut discretionary spending while ignoring recurring commitments. They cancel dinners but keep obligations. They feel disciplined but see no relief. Because relief doesn't come from cutting pleasure, it comes from lowering pressure. And pressure lives in recurring costs. There's also a time cost most people never calculate. Each subscription represents attention, maintenance, decisions, logins, updates, and guilt when unused. Mental clutter is financial clutter. The more things you're subscribed to, the more fragmented your focus becomes. And fragmented focus leads to scattered effort, which slows progress everywhere else. What's especially dangerous is how normalized this has become. A subscription-based life is now considered efficient, modern, even smart. But efficiency only works when the system serves you. When the system starts serving itself, efficiency becomes a trap. You're no longer optimizing for growth, you're optimizing for upkeep. The goal is not to eliminate subscriptions entirely. The goal is intentionality. Asking one simple question changes everything. If I had to manually renew this every month, would I still pay for it? That question forces honesty. It turns passive spending back into an active decision. And active decisions are where financial power lives. When people finally reduce recurring obligations, they often report something unexpected. It's not just more money, it's a sense of lightness. Fewer commitments. Fewer rules. Fewer things demanding consistency. And with that lightness comes flexibility, creativity, and momentum. In the next section, we're going to tie all of this together and look at the most misunderstood concept in personal finance. Why feeling broke is often less about income and more about how rigid your financial life has become, and how reversing that rigidity creates progress faster than any savings strategy ever could. Most people believe feeling broke is a money problem. They assume it means they don't earn enough, didn't save enough, or made too many mistakes early on. But in reality, feeling broke is usually a flexibility problem. It's what happens when too much of your future income is already promised to past decisions. When your financial life becomes rigid, even small disruptions feel catastrophic. A minor expense creates stress. A temporary drop in income feels like failure. Opportunities feel risky not because they are dangerous, but because you don't have room to absorb uncertainty. And the more rigid your system becomes, the more disciplined you have to be just to survive. This is where many responsible people get trapped. They confuse stability with progress. They optimize their lives to avoid mistakes rather than to create momentum. They build systems that minimize short-term discomfort but maximize long-term pressure. From the outside, everything looks under control. On the inside, it feels like running on a treadmill that never speeds up. Rigidity sneaks in quietly, fixed costs, long-term commitments, predictable routines. Each one feels like maturity. Each one feels safe, but safety has a cost. The cost is optionality. And optionality is the single most powerful asset in modern personal finance. Optionality means having choices. The choice to change jobs, the choice to take a break, the choice to invest when others can't, the choice to wait, the choice to act quickly. People with options don't need to predict the future. They can respond to it. People without options are forced to endure it. What's rarely discussed is that optionality doesn't require extreme wealth. It requires low rigidity. Someone earning a modest income with flexible expenses often has more real freedom than someone earning significantly more but locked into heavy commitments. This is why income alone doesn't fix the feeling of being broke. More money poured into a rigid structure just increases the size of the structure. It doesn't change its nature. This is also why traditional advice fails so many people. Just earn more sounds logical, but higher income often brings higher expectations, higher expenses, and more complexity. Without intentional design, people upgrade their lives in ways that permanently raise pressure. And once pressure rises, it rarely comes back down on its own. Flexibility works differently. When your baseline costs are low, every additional dollar works harder. Savings accelerate, investments compound faster. Side income feels meaningful. Mistakes are survivable. You stop needing everything to go right all the time. And that psychological shift alone can change how you show up in your career and decisions. Another overlooked benefit of flexibility is confidence. When you know you can absorb a hit, you act differently. You negotiate harder, you say no more often. You wait for better opportunities instead of jumping at the first acceptable one. Confidence doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less. This is why people who finally simplify often feel richer before they actually are. Their numbers may not change overnight, but their experience does. Money stops feeling tight. Decisions stop feeling urgent. Time horizons expand. And when your time horizon expands, your ability to build wealth improves dramatically. Rigidity also distorts your perception of risk. When your financial system can't handle volatility, everything feels risky. Investments feel dangerous. Career changes feel reckless. Entrepreneurship feels impossible. But when you have margin, risk becomes contextual. You can take small bets, you can test ideas, you can fail without damage. And that's where growth actually comes from. The paradox is that most people chase certainty to feel safe, but certainty is what makes them fragile. Flexible systems bend, rigid systems break. And personal finance, especially in a fast-changing world, rewards adaptability far more than it rewards perfection. Once you understand that feeling broke is often a symptom of rigidity, not income, the entire strategy changes. You stop asking how to save harder and start asking how to design a life that doesn't punish you for being human. You start measuring progress not just by net worth, but by how much freedom your structure allows. In the next section, we'll talk about how to intentionally rebuild flexibility without extreme sacrifices, and why small structural changes can unlock progress faster than years of disciplined saving ever could. Once you regain flexibility, the next mistake many people make is trying to immediately optimize everything. They want the perfect budget, the perfect investment plan, the perfect income strategy, but perfection is just another form of rigidity. Real progress doesn't come from building the most efficient system on paper. It comes from building a system that can evolve without breaking. This is where the idea of financial leverage gets misunderstood. Most people think leverage only means debt or risk. In reality, leverage is anything that allows the same effort to produce disproportionate results. And the most underrated form of leverage in personal finance isn't money. It's positioning. Positioning is about where you place your time, energy, and attention relative to opportunity. Two people can earn the same income, save the same amount, and invest the same way, yet end up in completely different places because one is positioned closer to upside. They are in environments where opportunities appear more often and compound faster. This is why some people seem to get lucky repeatedly. It's not luck, it's proximity. Proximity to information, proximity to people who are building things, proximity to industries that are growing rather than shrinking. Money flows toward motion, and positioning determines whether you're in that flow or watching it pass by. Rigid financial lives push people away from leverage. When every dollar is already assigned, there's no room to take advantage of asymmetric opportunities. A course that could multiply skills feels expensive. A temporary pay cut for a higher growth role feels impossible. A move to a better market feels irresponsible. The irony is that these are often the very decisions that unlock long-term wealth. What creates leverage isn't working harder. It's choosing situations where effort stacks. Skills that compound. Networks that expand. Systems that keep paying even when you stop pushing. But none of that works if your financial structure demands constant maintenance just to stay afloat. This is why career decisions matter more than most budgeting tactics. A career with capped upside forces you to rely on discipline forever. A career with scalable upside allows progress even during imperfect periods. This doesn't mean chasing unrealistic dreams. It means understanding where growth naturally occurs and positioning yourself closer to it. Leverage also exists in learning. Not all knowledge compounds equally. Some skills quickly become obsolete. Others increase in value over time because they improve your ability to learn the next thing faster. Writing, communication, data literacy, problem solving, decision making, these aren't trendy, but they are durable. They make you more adaptable in any environment. When your finances are flexible, you can invest in these forms of leverage without fear. You stop seeing learning as a cost and start seeing it as infrastructure. Infrastructure supports future growth. Consumption just feels good in the moment. Another overlooked leverage point is environment design. Your surroundings quietly shape your behavior. If your environment constantly nudges you toward spending, comparison, and urgency, discipline becomes exhausting. But when your environment supports intentional choices, progress feels lighter. This includes digital environments, social circles, and even the narratives you consume. People rarely fail because they lack willpower. They fail because their environment demands too much willpower for too long. Designing a life where good financial behavior is the default is far more effective than trying to resist temptation indefinitely. This is also where identity plays a role. When someone sees themselves as bad with money, they focus on control. When someone sees themselves as a long-term builder, they focus on alignment. Identity determines strategy, and strategy determines outcomes. Wealth isn't built by constantly fighting yourself. It's built by aligning your system with who you are and where the world is going. When those two move in the same direction, progress accelerates almost quietly. At this stage, saving more money isn't the goal. Building leverage is, and leverage, unlike discipline, gets easier over time. Once it's in place, it keeps working even when motivation fades. In the next block, we'll bring everything together and talk about how to balance structure and freedom without swinging to extremes, and how to design a financial life that feels both intentional and alive. If this is making you rethink how you've been handling money, you're in the right place. So if that's what you want more of, subscribe and let's keep going. At this point, the picture should be clear. Saving more money was never the villain. The problem is what happens when saving becomes the strategy instead of the foundation. When restraint replaces design and discipline replaces direction, people end up doing the right actions for the wrong outcome. Real financial progress doesn't come from extremes. It doesn't come from spending without awareness, nor from cutting joy out of your life in the name of responsibility. It comes from balance, but not the kind most people think of. Not a 50-50 split between saving and spending, but a deliberate alignment between what you earn, what you keep, and what you're building toward. A well-designed financial life has structure, but it also has slack. Structure gives stability. Slack gives resilience. Without structure, money leaks. Without slack, life feels tight. The goal isn't to eliminate constraints. It's to choose constraints that serve you rather than trap you. This is why value-based decisions matter more than universal rules. Someone else's version of a good life might look like waste to you, and your version might look irresponsible to someone else, but wealth isn't about appearances. It's about sustainability. A strategy that looks impressive but burns you out will eventually collapse. A strategy that supports your energy can compound for decades. When people stop obsessing over every small expense and instead focus on designing their major decisions intentionally, something interesting happens. They don't just feel richer, they act richer, they think in longer timelines. They tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term freedom. They stop chasing validation through spending and start investing in experiences, skills, and systems that quietly improve their lives. The irony is that this approach often leads to both more freedom and more enjoyment. When your big costs are under control, you don't need to justify small pleasures. A coffee becomes a choice, not a guilt transaction. A dinner with friends becomes part of a meaningful life, not a budgeting failure. This is the shift most people never make. They try to manage money emotionally instead of structurally. They punish themselves for human behavior instead of building systems that assume imperfection. But wealth is not built by being flawless. It's built by being consistent in an environment designed for success. As the world becomes more uncertain, this matters more than ever. Jobs change faster, industries evolve, costs rise unpredictably. In that environment, rigidity is a liability, flexibility is insurance, and leverage is the multiplier that turns effort into progress. So before you commit to another year of buying nothing, ask a better question. Are your biggest decisions giving you room to grow, or are they quietly shrinking your future? Are you optimizing for control or for capability? Are you building a life that requires constant sacrifice or one that supports momentum even when life gets messy? The people who win financially aren't the most disciplined. They're the most intentional. They don't rely on willpower. They rely on design. They don't just save money. They build systems that make saving, investing, and enjoying life compatible instead of competing. And when money finally stops feeling like a constant constraint, something powerful happens. You stop organizing your life around fear. You start organizing it around possibility. That's when saving stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like progress. Not because you're doing less, but because every dollar finally has a job that moves you closer to the life you actually want.